All right, I'm here with Jacqui Munro, anti-lockout law campaigner in Sydney, to tell us about what's going on up there. Jacqui, welcome to the Young IPA Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it looks like there's been a big change to the lockout laws this week. Why don't you tell us what's happened and how you've been celebrating?
Well, I wouldn't get too ahead of ourselves just yet. The government hasn't quite announced a particular change. The Premier has indicated that she would support the repeal of amendments that were made to the Liquor Act and the liquor regulations, but it's been pretty light on detail, except that perhaps King's Cross would still remain lockout affected.
That's a shame, because I've been across a few years ago before the lockout laws and it was quite a place, so that's a shame that that's the case.
It does seem like a bit of a strange exemption practically, but we'll see how that actually is rolled out, because there are a number of nuances that were introduced in relation to the lockouts, things like bringing out ID scanners for venues that may be addressed or may not be addressed. So I think a lot of the devil will be in the detail, as we will hopefully hear more about in the coming weeks from the government.
Yeah, because one of the things I've been seeing in a lot of reports is the idea that it's definitely going, I think it'll stop lockout laws in the CBD. Like, what are the things we do know so far?
Well, honestly, we don't really know all that much. I mean, the lockout laws really encompass a few different aspects of legislation. So it's things like serving drinks, as well as who is permitted to enter and when they're permitted to enter. And it really is entwined with not just liquor regulations, but also planning and development consent regulations. So there's quite a lot of detail.
Nice one. So, Jacqui, we heard rumours from one of our friends here in the IPA headquarters that you're a bit of a party animal. Now, what impact did the lockout laws have on Sydney's nightlife?
Well, a lot of my friends are involved in Sydney's nightlife in various ways, from being people who run clubs and run events, to musicians, whether it's electronic musicians and DJs, to playing in bands, jazz groups or rock bands, to sound and lighting engineers. Really, a lot of industries were affected by the imposition of the lockout laws. And then, of course, all the patrons who like to get out and meet their friends or make new friends when they're out on the dance floor. And really what it meant was a huge shrinking of that economy and their jobs, and the opportunity for people to go out as they chose to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, I know we are light on details at the moment, but you think about how many people have been affected by that, and we finally had the government sort of even suggest they might move towards repealing the lockout laws. This is still a pretty huge week, right?
It is definitely a big week, and there has been a lot of celebration because of that. People are really sharing a lot of articles on social media and congratulating a lot of the people who are very involved in the advocacy. And I mean, even at the state election, of course, we saw that the Keep Sydney Open political party did quite well in their upper house run. So there's a lot of political activity around this, but I think it is important that we don't jump the gun, because it's one thing to remove the lockout laws, but it's another to actually reinvigorate the nightlife so that we do have a thriving nighttime economy, and that the offerings in entertainment don't just plateau, they're actually increased. And the government really has a role in encouraging that, I believe.
Yeah, so let's assume that the lockout laws gets repealed to the extent that its CBD businesses don't have lockout laws anymore. Maybe King's Cross does still have lockout laws, and there's a few other areas as well. Would you sort of see that as this is as far as the government's willing to go on this issue, or do you think Gladys and maybe the Liberal Party are quite a bit more open to the idea of repealing further lockout laws, or is this sort of just like the least they can do to stop this being an issue?
Well, I think there's a really interesting difference in this review of the lockouts to the review that was conducted a couple of years ago by Ian Callanan. And to me, that has to do with the involvement of members of parliament, because Callanan was an independent, I guess, outsider. He wasn't an elected representative. But now we have an inquiry that was run by members of parliament who really have a vested interest in keeping constituents happy and really listening to the concerns of people in their electorates, and also, I guess, in a broader sense, so that their political parties are electable in the future. And so that's why, for me, it's really important that we don't jump the gun in celebrating, because there really is a lot more that needs to be done. And we need to continue to apply that pressure to say that the introduction of the lockouts, it happened very quickly, and it was quickly destructive. And to address that, we need to put in that extra action that will enliven the city and the economy.
One of the things about this whole campaign which struck me as interesting is that it probably brought together people from different parts of the political divide, and probably brought together people that were not that interested in politics in general. It's sort of a thing for libertarians and liberals that the nanny state can do that. It can be a kind of gateway drug, if you will. Is there any? Can you see any positive flow-on effects from that campaign for maybe attracting a few more people to that kind of liberal libertarian outlook?
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it is something that really goes to the heart of why the lockout or anti-lockout movement became so successful in bringing lots of people together who weren't necessarily traditionally involved in politics. And to me, that's why the government has to do more, because politically, I mean, I'm a Liberal. I was the Liberal candidate for Sydney in the federal election this year, and I really see that political involvement as people thinking that the Liberal Party didn't represent what they were supposed to, essentially, that Liberals and Libertarians are pro-business and generally pro-freedom, and people weren't seeing that from the government that they had elected, and so there was a real disconnect between what people thought the Liberal Party should be doing and what they really were doing. And to me, that is what generated a lot of activity. And it's not just Liberals and Libertarians who got involved. There really were people from all sides of the political spectrum who put their voices to this. And I think even the fact that there was a Keep Sydney Open party created, which is something that I found a bit opportunistic, I guess. For me, it wasn't the right way to go about things, and I wrote about that. But it really showed that people were willing to get involved in the political system in a way that they hadn't done before. So politically, the Liberal government has a real opportunity to enfranchise the public and enfranchise young people who are involved in these nighttime economy communities and these creative communities by supporting their activities rather than demonising them, really simply because they happen in the dark rather than in the day.
Yeah, it is always refreshing to know that no matter what side of the political divide you're on, no matter what we fight about in the daytime, everyone wants to party. So I was going to say, like, what are the other... so Keep Sydney Open, which you were a part of, was so influential in bringing these people together. Do you reckon there's any second, another nanny state idea that this sort of coalition can go after next?
I think the timing of this inquiry has been interesting. There are two somewhat related inquiries happening at the moment. The first one is an inquiry into the music festival amendments that were brought in with a view to restricting the licences that were granted for music festivals around New South Wales. And there's also the New South Wales coroner's investigation that's going on into deaths at music festivals. And I know that there's a lot of overlap in terms of the people who want to feel safe and want to, have access to those places in a safe manner in the way that they choose. And that perhaps may be something that Keep Sydney Open decide to pursue in the future, is going outside of Sydney and going into perhaps more regional areas where often those music festivals are held.
Yeah, cool. I got one more question for you. So let's say the lockout laws do get repealed and Sydney's nightlife does start to get back on its feet a bit and people are out and about. Sydney siders have really only had the lockout laws to blame as for reasons why, Melbourne is better than Sydney for partying. So has there been like a discussion about what other excuses you guys are going to have to rely on?
Good question, James.
Absolutely brutal. Well, I think there is absolutely no doubt that Sydney beats Melbourne, even in the safe cities index that the Economist released this week. We beat Melbourne even then. So
I got to say, if you're gonna throw the Economist at us as a reason why Sydney's better, I think we just win by default.
We do have a lot of work to do to ensure that we get a lot of that creative spirit back into Sydney. But of course, as a former candidate for Sydney, I can only extol the benefits of our beautiful harbourside city and the global nature of it as well. There's no better place.
All right, Jacqui, thanks so much for joining us. We'll end it there and hopefully we'll hear again from you soon.
Thanks so much for having me, James and Peter.